Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Business of Fun podcast. I am your host, Dave Wakeman. Today's episode is special. It's number 99. But it's also brought to you by my good friends at Booking Protect, the global leaders in refund protection. Any listing, any sector, anywhere, Booking Protect has you covered with the world's most comprehensive refund protection product. To find out how you and your organization can partner with Booking Protect to deliver a world-class customer service experience, better, more customized buying path, and let's be honest, maybe the most important thing is you can create a brand new stream of revenue for you and your organization. Visit them at www.bookingprotect.com. Again, that's www.bookingprotect.com. While I'm on it, today is Friday, January 31st, as I'm recording this. But on yesterday, which was Thursday, January 30th, 2020, Booking Protect and we released a brand new ebook called What Matters in Tickets Now. It's awesome. About 40 plus thought leaders, executives, ticket sellers, marketers from all over the world talking about what matters in tickets now. Some great essays from guys and girls like Angela Higgins of the Ticketing Professionals Conference of Australia, Andrew Thomas from the Ticketing Professionals Conference in Birmingham, Richard Howell, me, all kinds of folks. The feedback so far has been tremendous. So you want to go over to the Booking Protect website at www.bookingprotect.com/blog/. There will be a pop-up window at the top of the page will let you sign up and get the newsletter now. Or not the newsletter, the ebook right away. While I'm at it, I said newsletter, you should be getting my newsletter. It's called Talking Tickets. It is a weekly email that comes out on Friday morning overnight in DC. So some people, that's Friday evening in Australia because incredibly people sign up from all over the world. But you can get Talking Tickets. It's 5 top stories with quick analysis or action item or takeaways from a story to help you and your business take action, generate revenue, take advantage of what this story means and the opportunities it can create for you and your organization. You can get that by visiting my website. It's davewakeman.com. At the top of the page, there'll be a Get Talking Tickets newsletter link. Click that. It'll take you to a sign-up form. And you can get that and get it delivered every Friday. It's a great resource. People seem to love it. It's really a lot of fun for me to put together. So, Talking Tickets newsletter. My guest today is my friend David Fowler. David is a great sports marketer. He has originally, I found him because he has a really cool blog that he doesn't write often, but when he does, it's pretty awesome stuff. He also is working on a project called My Cujo, which is about bringing video to smaller sports organizations, and we talk about this a lot. I initially reached out to David to talk about a article, though, or a blog post that he wrote about the need for new ideas in sports business. That opened the door for all kinds of great stuff about ideas around leadership, about change, about vision, about marketing, about challenges and opportunities. He talks about soccer a lot, or football. Even I call it football at this point. We talk about the customer lifetime value. We talk about kind of removing the barriers to innovation. We talk about getting closer to fans. We talk about mindsets. We talk about selling. We talk about storytelling, data, emotions, all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is a really good conversation. We went in all kinds of different directions that I wasn't necessarily sure we were going to go in when we first started talking and chatting about having the podcast. So this is a really good one. This is probably a really good episode to have as number 99, knowing some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about with my special guest on episode 100, which will be coming up in very shortly, and some of the things that I'm going to do with the podcast going forward. So without further from me, here's my conversation with David Fowler on the Business of Fun podcast. I want to welcome David Fowler to the Business of Fun podcast. David, how are you?
Hi, Dave. I'm well, thank you. And you?
Oh man, I'm great. I'm great. It's a nice, beautiful, sunny day outside my window here where I'm recording. So it's awesome. I'm sure it's cold, but that's fine. Thank you so much for doing this. I have been really, as I was telling you before we started recording, been a big fan of your blog for years now. And you really recently wrote a piece about needing new ideas and new leadership in sports business. And I was like, well, I got to talk to David on the podcast. So thank you so much for doing this.
Great, no problem.
Yeah.
Glad you enjoy my blog.
Well, I'm sure like, for me, it's a labor of love, and you don't necessarily always know that people are paying attention to it, in the way you hope. So,
No, great compliment to hear that
yeah.
you're following it.
I'm always amazed when people read anything I write, and then I find out all of a sudden that they do, and I'm like, oh man, I
Lots
better
of
pay a
people.
slight more attention to this then. But let me start out by asking you about this blog post that you wrote that's titled New Leaders Needed to Drive #SportsBiz Change. What led you to bring this idea to life and put it on your blog?
Yeah, I think it goes back a little bit to where we are in the cycle of the business of sport in general. It feels like the business is going through a profound change. If you look at the sort of origins of the modern sports business model, it kind of almost started in the 80s when the Olympics and the Football World Cup created the modern blueprint, that's been copied across the globe. That model saw sports property owners take minimum guarantees for media rights from broadcasters, and then sit back and relax. They had the dollars in the bank and they didn't need to do much else. Now things in the modern landscape have really changed, and fans have access to content 24/7. There's a fragmented digital media landscape that we all talk about, till we're blue in the face, and sponsored brands are really hungry for content and data to facilitate their part in the fan experience. So I kind of saw this as a real profound change, and the change being that the forward-thinking sports properties are increasingly going direct to fan. They want to drive a deeper relationship with fans. They want to move from focusing on short-term revenues to managing the lifetime value of fans, but of course not undermining the relationship that fans have with their favourite club, team or player, which is very emotionally charged. So I think now what I saw was a really a step change in the business of sport. This idea that many sports organisations, leagues, clubs, etc., are going direct to fan and building their business, and as a result needs different skills, different experiences, capabilities, and as such different leaders who have experience in managing these types of businesses and business models.
Yeah, one thing that you highlighted, and you just mentioned it in the answer, which is something that I've been talking about for years, and it doesn't seem to necessarily be getting the traction that I want to consistently, is the idea of customer lifetime value. And I'm kind of curious about your opinion on this, about, define it for people so that they can understand it, so they don't hear it from me, but then also help my audience understand why it's important to put your relationship with your customer in that context of a lifetime value as opposed to just transactional, which unfortunately, if you look at the American sports business model right now, so many of the relationships are really have become just transaction based.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, customer lifetime value is not something that I was particularly familiar with, or let's say actively addressing in my previous life, working for a sports property holder. And in this case, the Football World Cup was our main property. And now, over the last few years, I've been working for My Cujo. We are the biggest football, soccer live streaming platform for long tail football, soccer. And I mean, as a platform which is trying to build communities around long tail sport, and trying to attract clubs and teams to stream their matches. We're really dependent upon managing a relationship with fans and facilitating a relationship with fans for our clubs and teams that are streaming on the platform. So it's really fundamental for us that we move, or that we as a business build our platform based on a relationship, a longer term view of the fan, the value that a fan gets from consuming the streams of their matches, and going beyond that, actually being part of a community around those clubs and teams that are on the platform, rather than just looking at them as a short term, as you said, transactional source of revenue, buying one match on a pay-per-view basis, or being the source of programmatic advertising revenue, that the source of the eyeballs that drives programmatic advertising revenue. It's really a concept that goes back to managing the fan life cycle, if you like, from being an early stage fan to generating a more engaged relationship with a club or even a player, towards looking at that really as a lifetime relationship rather than a one-off transactional relationship.
And you brought up the concept of the long tail, and I don't know. I'm familiar with it, and it goes back for people who don't understand, who've never heard the term, or maybe heard the term in passing. It goes back to I believe the mid '90s, when Chris Anderson wrote an article for Wired magazine, talking about how everything used to be predicated on mass. And then over time, as technology has changed and allowed people's attention to be more segmented, it's easier for people to make money off of, going to a smaller audience with more ideas and more content, I guess is the best way to describe it. But so that I can understand it and the audience can understand it through your lens, how would you define the long tail for properties and organizations you're working with?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dave. It's sometimes difficult. It can be an abstract term, long tail. For us, I think the easiest way to view long tail in our context, long tail soccer, long tail football, it's the clubs and teams that we deal with are really those that are not considered attractive enough from mainstream broadcasters. So we effectively empower those clubs and teams as an organisation to connect with their audiences, with their fan bases, by making streaming or reducing the barriers to stream, and making streaming very easy, accessible, free, and then from there giving them the tools to engage those fans. So yeah, long tail can be an abstract term. Unfortunately, when you go back to the concept of lifetime value, the engagement level around long tail soccer in our case, but sport in general, one could argue is far higher. You have kids who inherit, as they do in the top level of sport, but kids who inherit a preference for a certain local club in this case, and maybe they become a player at one point in their life, or they stand amongst a crowd of tens or maybe hundreds of others, really committed supporters, part of a smaller community of highly engaged fans, and maybe even a volunteer at the club. This is a very intriguing model of lifetime relationship with a club, where it can be far deeper than one would observe from a fan of a professional club. So actually the concept of lifetime value in the context of long-tail sport becomes much more multifaceted and really interesting, maybe more complicated to understand, but fascinating for us as an organisation here at My Cujo, where we're trying to build a platform which has never been built before, and trying to expose these smaller clubs and leagues and and give a platform for these fans who have a deep, passionate love for these clubs, and give them a place they can call home.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the most important parts about this too is the fact that or maybe it's missed too often, is that your sports team in a lot of ways is like going home. It's, I grew up in northern Georgia. We were talking about where am I originally from before we started recording. And so to an extent, I'm always going to be just slightly attached to those sort of markers that were there when I was growing up in northern Georgia. So the University of Georgia, even though I went to the University of Alabama, Clemson was less than an hour from my house as well. So that, like, those schools, those are big, but all these things that, there's a sense of place and community that I think giving people an opportunity to experience. Maybe you had a minor league team, right? Like I had the Fort Lauderdale Yankees when I was in high school. Being able to stream those games is great because those emotional ties, they're always there. And I know that one of the big things for you, especially that kind of drives the platform that you work on and the work that you're doing, is this idea of community. And so I want to ask you about the need to recognize and put in the proper place community around the team and the engagement of the team, and how important that is as far as a driver of marketing success and lifetime relationships. Because you brought up the relationship aspect too, which I also don't know that people talk about nearly enough.
Yeah. The vision of the founders of our company was very, very clear, and they based their idea for the company on the principle that teams and clubs playing in the long tail of football had these passionate communities. These communities existed. They weren't. It's not something that we were necessarily trying to create. And the communities include all sorts of personas. They include not only fans, but players, coaches, and others who contribute to these local clubs. And unfortunately, many had no home, certainly no digital home. If you were not at the venue on a match day, it was virtually impossible for you to consume or to watch the match. So this is really the community is really the basis upon which the work I'm doing at My Cujo is based. The work we're all doing is based, and it's a great reference point for this discussion around the importance of community. We see the sense of community as a key motivation for fans to come to our platform, and I'm sure this is really common across all platforms and other organisations that are supporting not only sports clubs but other focal points for communities. For example, we broadcast in January the under-20 Copinha competition, which is regarded as one of the biggest or the biggest youth competition in the world. It's located in Brazil, run by the Paulista Federation in Sao Paulo, featuring most or if not all of the top clubs in Brazil. We saw tens of thousands of fans on our platform exchanging hundreds of thousands of messages in our chat boards during the live matches that we've been broadcasting over the last few weeks in January. It's really amazing to see fans who are geographically dispersed across a country so big as Brazil engaging each other in chat. It's one very obvious example of how a platform like ours can help these clubs and can help these communities to find a focal point or a platform to exchange with each other, even though they may not be at the match, which was one of the biggest is one of the biggest challenges that we saw facing some of the smaller clubs and leagues that had no other window to the world, if you like.
Yeah. And, we kind of touched on all around these things. And I think one of the ideas that's really interesting to me, which you again laid out in your blog post, but it's the idea that we need new ideas, right? Number one, and then we need new leadership. And I guess the way that you termed it was, people need, and I'll walk that back. I'll say this. It's just sort of, sometimes the leadership doesn't have the right skill set to make the right decisions, as far as like building community or adapting technology or pushing some of these new ideas forward. And so from your vantage point of working with clubs and all over the place, what are some of the either new ideas or the new skills or new ways of thinking that you'd like to see people embrace to help push the games forward, to help kind of capitalize on this sense of community and the opportunity that streaming and technology has given us to connect with people all over the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, first of all, I'd seen some evidence and some research out there which kind of pointed to a number of factors that were possibly inhibiting leadership within the sports business from making decisions, particularly around the implementation of technology. Not to say that the implementation of technology is key in any way for the development of communities or for the development of sport or the sports business in general, but obviously, given the context of most industries and the world in general at the moment, technology is a key aspect of daily life and the digital driven media consumption that we are all part of is very important for leaders to understand. There's research from Scrum Ventures, which I quoted in the article, which suggested that among sports business decision makers, about a third of them believed that a lack of qualified decision makers amongst leadership in the sports business was the main factor inhibiting them from adopting new tech driven solutions. So this for me is one of the key aspects that I think generally across the sports business needs to be addressed. I kind of believe that the leaders that will be needed to drive this direct to consumer, the general direct to consumer step change that we're seeing in the business will come partly from, I guess they should come from a complementary range of industries, but in that mix of leaders, that there has to be people who understand the need to work closely with technology and product teams together with those in a more business or sports department perspective for driving the results across the organisation. They need to understand how to use data, to harness data, to experiment and learn. I think a lot of the last 5-10 years, we see so much data. We're drowning in data now. They need to be able to cut through and identify the data that matters. They need to understand the value in iterating in smaller steps and testing and learning, and it also goes back to the data question, what data to use and how best to iterate in smaller steps and what to experiment around and what to prioritize. These are things that I think we're missing generally across the sports business. We have a lot of very, very talented people in leadership positions. However, I think the blend of skills and capabilities is really what I was challenging.
Yeah, and you bring up this interesting idea, which is that tech is not essential to community. And one of the things that I ask people about pretty regularly here is the place of data in that decision-making and community-building process. And I guess I'll ask it, I'm going to try to ask it the way I normally do, but I may not get it exactly right this time. But do you think that always leading with the digital solution first, or always thinking digital first, leads us to make decisions that aren't necessarily always in the best interest of that community building process?
Well, that sounded like a leading question, Dave.
It's tough for me to ask that question without leading the idea that I go, you have to have your strategy right before you do the tactics. So I guess I did lead you. So I guess, do you agree with me?
Do I have a choice?
You don't have a choice. Do you agree with me?
I think no, absolutely, I do agree. I think we're getting a little bit obsessed with data, and in sport, one of the challenges we have is that the relationship between a fan and a club or even a player is very emotionally charged. I think we have to be quite sensitive to the fact that we don't commoditize the relationship between fans and clubs and or players that they follow. It's a very different, I believe it's a very different relationship that a fan has to a club or player in the sporting context than they might have with a consumer packaged goods brand, for example, which has maybe more freedom and flexibility to drive decisions through data. I think the mere mention of community drives towards that fact. I think community is really a cornerstone of every club, every sports club. We have to be very careful in my role as a marketer, I have to be very careful to remind myself that it's not just numbers in a spreadsheet that will drive success, both commercially and otherwise. We have to be very sensitive to that relationship.
Well, I mean, I probably have another leading question then. And I think I probably am able to ask these leading questions because I know where the answer is going anyway, but, not to show my hand or anything. But I guess one of the interesting ideas about your answer was like, we don't want to commoditize the relationship, which is very important. And yet I think a lot of people struggle to move beyond just looking at the numbers on the screen, right? Like a derisive term that gets thrown around is spreadsheet jockeys. I may have even used that at some point myself. But how do you help people understand or move past the numbers back to being able to see the people that are on the other end of the relationship? Because like you pointed out, which is absolutely true, it's played out in the data. You don't have to even dig very deeply for it. People have a stronger emotional connection to their sports teams than they do to any other brands. That's just a fact. And then if there is a second tentacle like American colleges, then it's even a deeper relationship. So how do you take people and go, hey, look, it's great. Look at the numbers. But remember, we have to turn those numbers back around and remember that there are people on the other end.
Yeah. I think what funny data storytelling is kind of becoming a thing at the moment. I see a lot of roles for data storytellers. I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago this didn't exist. I think that says quite a lot for where we are. There's a certain appetite for more context around data. I think we start to realize that numbers are not enough. We need to also harness the emotions around the numbers and not simply look at spreadsheets. I was told that Rudyard Kipling, the author, once wrote that if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. And I think the same applies to data in that case. If we can bring out, explain and rationalize, maybe rationalize is the wrong term, but if we can contextualize the numbers with the emotions and the real people behind them, it helps. I think it can only help us to make better decisions. And in this case, going back to the relationship between the fans and their club.
Oh yeah, the idea too, the Kipling idea that if history was told with stories, we'd never forget it. And then your point about the numbers needing to be put in the context of a story is absolutely true. I did a talk for a while. I haven't done it lately, but where I talked about specifically that, which it's one of the most true things that we can all should know and keep in mind is that as animals, we are storytelling creatures because we have been telling stories before language even existed. And it was the way that we were able to survive and evolve. So by not using stories as a piece of our marketing arsenal or using them effectively, we're fighting against, millions of years of evolution. Stories are just how we convey our most important messages, right? And emotions.
Yeah.
And, it's, again, to go back to the data and our emotionally charged relationship with the fans, it's just who we are as creatures, right? I mean, you just have to recognize it begins with, it goes back to my leading question. You start with what you're trying to achieve. What's the goal, right? I want to grow my fan base. I want to generate more revenue. I want to reach a larger audience. Well, what story do you need to tell these people to get them to become a part of your community, of your tribe, of your group?
Yeah.
And if you don't start there, then you're always going to struggle, I think. But you may have a slightly different viewpoint on that. I maybe tend to end up being sort of absolute on certain things. And the importance of storytelling, I think, is one of those things.
Yeah, and I think it's a really underrated skill. We've got some excellent storytellers here at My Cujo, and I'm not one of them. I'm really envious of those who have that skill. I've got to say it's really, really valuable. Really valuable skill for someone to have, very underrated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would tell anybody the fastest way to improve their career or their life is to take a storytelling class. You don't have to tell complex stories, because a lot of people go, well, I could never do that. And I go, if you put your mind to it, everybody can improve their storytelling capability. Even in the context of something like this podcast. Studying story structures helps me become a better podcast host, a better leader of panels, right? A better writer, a better communicator. Everybody should be focusing on that. And it should be just like something that we learn in school, and something that's encouraged for us to develop over our lifetime. It's incredibly valuable. And I think this is me speaking, not you. I won't put this burden on you, but I think that not using stories powerfully, which seems to be a challenge for sports business in a lot of contexts now, is one of the missed opportunities that's going on. I look at Major League Baseball and it just hurts me sometimes, because their stories and the stories around so many of these franchises is some of the most powerful things that they have. And to not use them, it's just brutal. And, I've been a Tottenham Hotspur fan for, I think, 3 years now. But the stories around the team help draw me in, right? I only can connect to the team through 3 years, but now I can connect to a history through the stories. And it's such an incredibly powerful tool. And because stories drive emotions and emotions drive actions, sports really needs to do a better job of it, because it's like, it's teed up, right? Like, to use a golf analogy, it's right there for us.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, we've managed to unearth some great stories, as you can imagine, connecting with clubs around the world, from the smallest to the largest countries and the furthest corners of the earth. We've unearthed some amazing stories of passion for the sport of soccer. It's really awe-inspiring, some of the stories that we've unearthed, and I think that's the skill. It's trying to kind of bring them to a form that brings emotion and passion and moves people. I think there was one great example that I recall of Sunderland, another English football club, made a documentary with Netflix, which was a fascinating insight into a club, a football club. But also one of the abiding memories for me was the real passion the fans had for the club. And again, going back to the sense of community, there was one scene, and I hope I don't offend any listeners, but there was one scene in the documentary where the minister is standing up in front of the congregation in the church, and he says, "Let us pray for Sunderland and for our city. Lord our God, help us understand what football means for our community. Help us through our anger and our fury when the team is not performing as best as it can." So it's kind of trying to get any advantage for his club. It was really an amazing insight into the stories that are going on in the background, and particularly from a fan perspective. In that case, a man of the cloth who was trying to get an advantage from the highest power for his club. But very, very insightful, great story.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who's listened has made it this far with me on the podcast is going to get offended by much. If I have not done that by now, I don't know that we will ever do it. But it also, I think it's actually a great example because it highlights just how important these teams are, especially when you get outside of the huge teams that are global brands. Like Sunderland, or, to use a U.S. example, maybe somebody like the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Pirates, who are still huge brands, right? Like I knew who Sunderland was before I even saw the TV show. But, they like, have a little bit more of a regional or a local appeal. They are centers of the city, right? And it goes back to that community thing, which is like just so essential to, I think, the success of a lot of sports properties and sports organizations. That you don't have to be the biggest in the world to be successful and, build a great fan base, make a lot of money.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something entirely different now that we've kind of beat down on ideas and leadership. We're still early in 2020. And what are some of the new ideas or new opportunities you're looking at for the coming year? Either there's things that you're maybe excited to work on or focus on, or things that you just want to see how they play out just in the industry, period.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a couple of things that are somewhat connected to the broader theme of new leaders in the sports business. One really for me is one trend, one topic I'm observing is really this need to remove barriers that are impeding our understanding of what fans want. And this idea of going direct to fan for sports clubs, federations, it's really will not work unless they start to remove those barriers. For example, they need to get closer and more direct access to the insights that fans are providing to them. That if there's always there will be needs for agencies and others to help to drive initiatives and deliver on things that clubs want to do. But in these cases, I think just making sure that they're on the front line and not maybe hiding behind others who are potentially speaking to the fans on the front line. That those inside the club need to have as close a contact to the fans to understand their motivations and needs. Similarly, the example of selling rights to a broadcaster, getting a minimum guarantee and walking away, you'll never understand the habits of your audience if that continues to be your model. And of course, there's still lots of value in working with mainstream broadcasters. I certainly don't challenge that, but in those cases, sports organisations need to work harder to understand how fans are consuming their content or interacting with their federation, league or club across multiple touch points, and not hide behind or not sort of put up with those barriers which exist to having a more intimate relationship with those fans.
Well, let me ask you about this removing barriers thing too, because I'm curious about this. Because one of the things then that I preach this. I also know that it is not unusual for any industry to struggle with this, is talking to their customers. It's like they're afraid to know what somebody's going to really say about them. Or they only talk to them in a kind of superficial way. Or with a lot of the sports teams, right, because they've taken a minimum guarantee from a broadcaster or they've taken money from mainstream broadcasters. Every relationship and every communication really becomes almost transactional again. Why do you think there's this reluctance, or maybe I'm even wrong about this, but of seeing a reluctance? Why do you think there's this disconnect between the organizations talking to and understanding their fans? And how would you suggest that people kind of overcome that, and get back into the habit of talking to, engaging, and really knowing who their fans and their customers are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly simple to change not fairly simple. I think the idea is simple to change. It's a change of mindset that's required, and I think behind that, obviously, organisations need support to then drive that change. That the mindset change that's needed is to really accept responsibility for the management of the relationship with fans, and not outsource that relationship. I think that's the most simple terms I can communicate it. But obviously behind that, there's lots of work, maybe more complex systems, and to support the execution of that kind of strategy, direct-to-fan strategy. But in the end, it really is accepting the responsibility that no one else can manage the relationship with your fans and your fan community other than you. And we as a platform, that's exactly our philosophy, is to listen to clubs and teams in the sport of soccer and actually understand what they need to help them manage, what they need from our platform to help them manage the relationship with their fans. And that's what we're putting a lot of our focus on, to ensure that clubs and teams at the longer tail of the sport can effectively build and manage their fan communities through the platform without us having to, step in or having to intervene or support. They have the tools they need. They can communicate via app notifications, email. They can share on social channels their content and bring people into the live matches that they're broadcasting with us. They can facilitate chat conversations. They can moderate chat rooms. These kind of things we're continuously developing, so that we put the power in the hands of clubs and teams to really manage and understand their fans. Registering fans is obviously important to enrich the data that we can provide to them around their fan bases, in this case as well. So I think mindset for me is really, really important, and until the organisation accepts that responsibility, it's quite difficult to do anything else.
Yeah, I probably couldn't agree more strongly with that, because I think that one of the missing pieces, or one of the most important things that people can do, is they can understand that the most important relationship they have is with their customer. That your job as a business, because at the end of the day, this is what you have as a business. It may be an emotionally charged business, but it's still a business. And your number one job is to create and keep customers. And you don't do that by outsourcing your relationships to 100 different people, platforms, and partners. So I could not agree more strongly with what you said on that.
Yeah, it's a real problem for some. I think one other thing I'm looking at, Dave, is this is maybe more closer to home. I think we've and more on the front end commercial side. We see from our perspective here at My Cujo that a lot of the brands we're talking to are hungry for content. They're hungry for data. They're hungry to play a role in facilitating these fan relationships with sports organisations. I saw a recent tweet from Ricardo Fort of Coca-Cola, who's one of the kind of leading lights in the sports marketing business, and someone I follow closely. He said, if I was selling sponsorships, I would charge for content and experiences and give visibility for free. So he's also kind of in this tweet, he was sort of challenging the old model of selling media exposure to brands. He also went on to say, unfortunately, most rights holders do the exact opposite. So they're very, very much stuck in the old model. So that's something that we as a platform are addressing also this year. And I'm really interested to see how many follow us in terms of putting content at the forefront of what we offer brands, to really enable them, empower them to activate across the multitude of touch points they have with their potential customers, and how they can add value to the experience of fans by taking content, giving content a broader platform, ensuring that through the resources they have, that fans can enjoy sport, and in our case football, better, offering incentives, rewards, playing their part in making sport a more enjoyable experience. This is where we see the future, and I'm really keen to see if many other sports federations and also platforms are going to follow that call that I see from people like Ricardo Fort, but also one that we've already embraced and are hearing day to day from brands that we speak to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you even need data, because I know we beat up on data a little bit here. You don't even need data to recognize the idea that putting your relationship and putting your promotion or your advertisement in a more holistic context or in a more meaningful context is more valuable. I think people still get stuck on impressions being the easy as a driver of sponsorship and partnership sales because it's easy to measure. But the thing is that is it the most valuable thing to measure? And I would say that probably the answer is no in a lot of cases, because we become very good at blocking out a lot of the noise and clutter in our lives. If not, we would go crazy. And I think I'll be curious to see what, new ideas, new information, and new data points come out of your push to kind of flip that model on its head and say context and meaning matters over just sheer numbers.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think that's exactly what sponsor brands are looking for as well. They want to be part of the story. To go back to the storytelling aspect, they're masters. Most brands are masters at storytelling, supported by some of the most brilliant creative minds around the world. Coca-Cola, no better example than Coke in this case, and certainly in a sports context, they're very active. And that's really what they're looking for. They want to tell stories around their brands, but also to enhance the experience that fans can have around their favorite clubs, players, leagues, etc. And to do that, you need content, and that's really going to be one of the key topics, I think, for this year and the years to come. How many sports properties are actually able to furnish brands with content. In many cases, content is ring fenced by broadcasters. So many of the top clubs, leagues, federations, even they have no content to give to brands to facilitate that storytelling experience and actually to help, to work with the brands to help promote their sport or their league or federation. So it's a big topic, I think, more commercially focused, but I think it's certainly another big topic that I'll be watching, that we here at My Cujo will be watching with interest over the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you focus on the customer and you focus on telling the customer or that relationship with your customer and you focus on telling them better stories and giving them a better experience, typically, in my experience, coming from both the property side, the consultant side, the brand side, kind of having touched on this in all aspects, is typically the money follows. The attention follows. The audience follows. But you have to start with putting the customer at the center of everything. And I think that is like probably one of the most important lessons that you or me or anybody that people are going to listen to can remember, is that always put the customer at the center of everything you're doing. Or in this case, with sports, the fan.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys in North America and the US particularly are masters at this, or certainly far ahead of where we are in Europe. But I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Now, David, where do people find you on the internet?
So I'm on Twitter at David G. Fowler, LinkedIn, David G. Fowler, and those are probably the primary two places to check me out on the internet. I obviously have the blog on WordPress, which is also under the name David G. Fowler. I think it's davidgfowler.wordpress.com. And I think that's about it.
No, that's good. It's also consistent.
Exactly. David G. Fowler.
As soon as you start thinking people are tired of your campaign, that's just when they're first starting to notice. So you don't stop. Everything's David G. Fowler. David, thanks so much for doing the podcast, man.
Loved it, Dave. Thanks again.
Let me know what you thought about my conversation with David. Send me an email. It's my name, Dave, at davewakeman.com. You can find out what I'm up to by visiting my website at www.davewakeman.com. Find my blog. You'll find all kinds of great stuff there. Tons of resources, media appearances, all kinds of great stuff. Go check it out. As always, I'd love it if you connect with me on the social media. Follow me on Twitter. It's at David Wakeman. As I've said now for almost 99 episodes, maybe 99 episodes, I don't know. If you know the person who has the at Dave Wakeman Twitter handle, I'd love it. Get it for me. The guy hadn't tweeted since 2010. That's a decade. I need that Twitter handle. Also, I'd love it if you connect with me on LinkedIn. You can check me out by just searching my name, Dave Wakeman, and find me there. As always, another thing, as always, I have a verbal tick. Who knew? After 99 episodes, you learn these things. If you like what I'm doing with the podcast, if some of these conversations have been valuable for you, if you've learned something, I'd love it if you share it with a colleague or a friend, someone you think might gain some new knowledge, some new information, some new insights by listening to these conversations. I'd love it. Also, if you have been listening, sharing the podcast, doing all that stuff, I'd love it if you become a subscriber. We're on all the major podcast platforms now. It's amazing. And finally, if you shared and you subscribed, why don't you leave me a rating or a review? These things all add up. They help make sure people discover the podcast. It offers encouragement to me to help or to continue to do it. I think I enjoy doing it, and I've had tremendous great results and met so many new people because of it. But it still encourages me. But also, it encourages me the guests to come on and share their insights and their ideas with you. So make sure you rate and review the podcast. I'd like to remind you to sign up for my Talking Tickets newsletter. It's a weekly email, comes out on Friday morning my time, overnight. So Friday evening, some places, Friday morning, others. I think it hits everybody's inbox at some point on Friday. And you can get that by going to my website. It's davewakeman.com and look for the Talking Tickets link at the very top of the page. I want to thank Booking Protect for being the partners with me on the Business of Fun podcast. As I mentioned at the start, we have released a brand new newsletter this week. Not newsletter, an ebook called What Matters in Ticketing Now. You can get it by visiting their website at www.bookingprotect.com/blog/. It's 40-something ideas from around the world about how to improve your ticketing, the ticket sales, marketing of events, customer service, all kinds of topics. It's great. The feedback so far has been tremendous. Also, if you haven't already, I would strongly encourage you to check out what they're doing. Booking Protect offers you the best customer service in the world for refund protection. Hands down. If you don't believe me, you should have seen Simon on the panel at Intix, where he was bringing his philosophy and his ideas on customer service to the entire audience at Intix. We talked about the foundational ideas behind customer service. It's just great. Booking Protect lives those ideals every day. On top of customer service, though, an important aspect of the buying journey is customization, and partnering with Booking Protect allows you to offer more customization to your customers. And a final little kicker is that you also can create a brand new stream of revenue for your organization, which with budgets tighter than ever, revenue at a premium, it's so super important. So to find out how you can become Booking Protect's partner, visit them at www.bookingprotect.com. Again, that's www.bookingprotect.com. And make sure while you're there, you check out the What Matters in Tickets Now ebook. It's fantastic. As always, I'm going to thank you for being here. The next episode is episode 100. I'm pretty excited what we're going to do going forward from episode 100. But until I put that out into the world, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your attention and listening. I couldn't do it without you. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.